Welcome back to the show. We are now joined by a very special guest, Mike McCabe of the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. If I misspoke before the break, I apologize, Mike. Welcome to the Devil's Advocate Show.
Oh, thanks for having me. Good to be with you.
Thanks, Mike.
So, Mike, your organization is a tax-exempt 501c3 nonprofit, and tell me what your stated purpose is, Mike.
We're a watchdog group that specializes in tracking the money in state politics and helping the public and reporters track those transactions and see how all of that money affects decisions in our government. And then we also advocate for reforms aimed at trying to keep our government as clean and open and honest as possible and try to create a system where people matter more than money in politics.
And Mike, your organization's purpose is nonpartisan by nature, is it not?
It sure is. You know, we shine light in all directions, and the money that flows to Democrats, to Republicans, we want the public to be able to see all that money, and so we don't just shine light in one direction, nor do we blow the whistle just on one side if we see something that just doesn't pass the smell test. We're equal opportunity whistleblowers.
We had an unusual circumstance here in the state of Wisconsin with the recall election and the strange campaign finance circumstances that set forth, Mike. Was it overwhelming to see the money flow into the state of Wisconsin associated with that recall campaign?
Oh, it was like nothing we'd ever seen before. We had a raging campaign arms race before the recall elections, but we saw $137 million spent in those recalls, $81 million just on the governor's race. Most of that money came from outside of the state of Wisconsin. That's something that we just had never seen before. Really, ever since the Supreme Court's decision in the Citizens United case, we've seen election spending in Wisconsin more than triple since the Citizens United case, and we had a heck of an arms race going on even before that ruling came down, and yet we've seen some $377 million spent since 2010
Mike,
on Wisconsin elections.
Is that number somewhat inflated because of the ability for unlimited fundraising by the person being recalled?
Yeah, that $137 million that was spent on the recall elections was in part fueled by that quirk in state law that allowed recall targets to engage in unlimited fundraising. You saw Governor Walker get contributions as large as $500,000 from individual donors. And then you saw $75 million in outside interest group spending. But you know what? Even if you take the recall spending out of the equation, spending still more than doubled since the Citizens United decision went into effect. So that decision has opened the floodgates and led to really putting the arms race on steroids in this state and across the country.
You're listening to the Devil's Advocates on the Mike 92.1. Mike McCabe, with the money spent, what would you consider a breakdown roughly? Is it 50-50, 60-40 for, Dems versus Republicans?
Well, in the Senate recall elections in 2011, we saw a very even split. It was pretty much 50-50 between Democrats and Republicans. Mm-hmm. But then in 2012, and particularly in the governor's race, there was a very lopsided advantage to the Republicans.
Sure.
They spent vastly more than the Democrats. So there have been elections in recent years where the Democrats have had a slight edge. There have been elections where the Republicans had a clear edge. There have been ones where it was a little bit more close. But most recently, when you look at 2012, the advantage to the Republicans has gotten very lopsided.
Mike McCabe, Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. Is your organization currently tracking the Wisconsin Supreme Court election?
We'll be watching the Supreme Court election very closely, and I think it promises to be a very expensive one. We've seen spending run up to $6 million in recent Supreme Court elections. Really, since 2007, we've seen an explosion in Supreme Court spending. So we'll be watching that one very closely. It's not really unfolding yet, so we're not seeing a lot of money yet. but we will shortly, and I think that it'll probably become a pretty expensive election.
Well, I see that Patience Roggensack currently has fundraisers every week. You must pay $250, $500, or $1,000 to attend. I don't see Vince Megna or Ed Falone raising cash at that sort of level at this point.
Not at this point, and I don't know if their fundraising will pick up or whether she'll just have a really commanding advantage. But, there was just a study put out today showing that the Justice Roggensack has been the most regularly has most regularly sided with business interests in her decisions in the court of all of the members of the Supreme Court. She's been the most business-friendly justice on Wisconsin's Supreme Court, and so I think you can probably expect that business interests will go all in for her to try to get her reelected, because she's been most regularly siding with business interests of any of the current members of the court, including Justice Prosser, Justice Ziegler, Justice Gableman. Justice Roggensack's pro-business voting record on the court surpasses all of those people.
Well, let's talk a little bit of business about your organization, Mike. The Wisconsin Democracy Campaign had a recent setback financially, to my understanding. What happened to some of the funding you folks were receiving?
It was more than a minor setback. I mean, we had received funding from the Joyce Foundation, which is the leading funder of democracy work in the Great Lakes. We had received the foundation's support for 16 years, and we were informed over the holiday season that support was ending after that 16-year relationship, and that is the funding that we used to create the searchable online database of campaign contributors, the money tracking operation that we have, and it was funding that we used to continue to update and expand that database and that money tracking system over the years. And it amounted to slightly more than half of our income. So that was a huge hole that was blown in our budget. And so now we have a situation where in the weeks and months to come, we have to find alternative sources of revenue. We have to reach out to people who believe that it's important to track the money in politics and be able to follow these transactions and see how all this money is influencing decisions in our government that affect us. If people feel that that's important, we need to ask them to step up and support this kind of work, or it'll go away. And I think that would be a huge loss to the state of Wisconsin. There was just a hearing yesterday on this mining legislation. And the legislators who were sitting on that committee that were taking that testimony, they were sitting there having received over $825,000 in campaign contributions from mining interests.
Do you think that affects them, Mike? Or?
And I tell you, it's impossible to expect anyone who is concerned about this issue to think that they're going to listen objectively to testimony and that they're not going to put more weight on the testimony of those mining interests who've supplied them with so much campaign money. Just the committee members alone, $825,000 in campaign contributions over the last 2 years since this legislation was being developed. They let the mining industry write the legislation, and the Senate Majority Leader even came out and on camera admitted that it was the corporations that wrote this bill. And then, this money flows in. It's pretty hard for any citizen to, if you follow that money trail, to say, well, we think we'll get a fair shake from these legislators. We think they'll listen and give equal weight to everybody's message. And that's one of the things that our money tracking operation makes possible, is to give people the ability to see, who has given to these people who are making decisions on things like the mining bill.
Well, Mike McCabe, I had seen that the mining company promised economic activity, and it looks like it has begun with these massive contributions. Mike McCabe, before we got to get to break here, quickly, give us your website. How can people donate to your organization? Obviously, you need some fundraising help. Give them the website. Give them the best way to get money into your hands to help continuing to fight this good fight.
It's wisdc.org, so WISDC.org, or you can just Google Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. Right in the top right-hand corner, there's a donate button, so you can give right online, and it's a secure website. And we would obviously at this point just call on people who care about this kind of work to step up and help make sure that it doesn't go away. And I thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to talk about these kinds of issues.
Mike McCabe, Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, thank you very much for being a very special guest of the Devil's Advocates. We are late to break. We'll be back after this short message.